This is Jason Romano from Sports Spectrum, and if you want to maximize your potential for success, then I recommend subscribing to the Success is a Choice podcast.
Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Welcome to Success is a Choice podcast. I'm your host, Jamy Bechler, and today's guest is used to asking the questions. In fact, he's one of the top interviewers on the airwaves today. Ken Coleman has been the host of the top-rated EntreLeadership Podcast and now has the Ken Coleman Show, which can be heard on Sirius XM Channel 132 daily, right next to Dave Ramsey, Nancy Grace, and Glenn Beck. His book, One Question, contains interviews with amazing people like President Jimmy Carter, Malcolm Gladwell, Pat Summitt, Tony Robbins, and Senator John McCain, just to name a few. He is also a frequent guest host of the Dave Ramsey Show. He normally asks the questions, but we'll be flipping the script today and putting Ken Coleman on the hot seat. So Ken, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you, Jamie.
Yeah, no, I absolutely loved your podcast, EntreLeadership, but you're now the host of your own show, the Ken Coleman Show on Sirius XM. For our listeners that maybe aren't as familiar with you, fill in the gaps a little bit from our intro and tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got from, starting off where you say you only had 2 listeners and one was your wife to now where you're on Sirius XM.
Well, that's quite a journey, and I'll try to be very, very brief and let you follow up where you feel the listeners need to know, because that's quite a story. That's a 7-year journey, almost 8-year journey, and it started with doing high school football play-by-play on the internet as a part of a broadcasting school that I signed myself up for. I was the only person in the school. I think there was a 8-person class, and I was the only person in my 30s, 31 at the time. Had owned my own business, still own my own business, but knew that God was calling me into media and wasn't sure how in the world I was going to get there. I knew I wanted to do media that mattered. I also knew that I love sports, and I felt like if I could get into sports radio, sports broadcasting, I could eventually cross over, and that's all I could see, because the path was so unknown for me. I didn't go to school for broadcasting. So signed up for this class, and it really did lead to several relationships in the Atlanta area, and really did boost me to the point where I launched the Ken Coleman Show in the Atlanta area. I think 2012. And it was a weekly show on Saturdays at first, then eventually moved to drive time every day. Over that span of time, Dave Ramsey was paying attention, because I knew Dave through another leadership conference and mutual friends. And in 2014, he said, "Hey, I want you to come join me." And the role was to take over the EntreLeadership Podcast, which was very, very successful at the time, still is, has grown since then, but an incredible national platform to continue doing what I love, which is certainly interviewing people is a big part of what I love to do, and also hosting the Ramsey live events. So these are large live events, anywhere from 1,000 people to 7,000 people, and also host the video channel, which is the live feed of his radio show. And so when he'd go to radio break, I would do live programming. And so at that time, that was the role, and I felt like it was an unbelievable opportunity. And it eventually, about 1.5 years in, Dave said, "Hey, why don't you host my show with Rachel Cruz and Chris Hogan, 2 other Ramsey, 2 other Ramsey personalities." And here I am hosting the 3rd largest radio show in America, a dream come true. I always felt like I could hang on a national level, if you will, and to host the 3rd largest radio show in America, 12 million people. It was a dream come true. It was awesome. And so things have just continued to develop in my role here and my content, and Dave and I, our visions coming together. And so earlier in 2017, Dave kind of said, "Hey, we want Ken to be our Ramsey personality in the area of career and personal development." And so the dream continued to evolve, and we launched the Ken Coleman Show, which is completely focused on helping people discover what they were created to do, and then helping them figure out a plan and seeing that dream become a reality. And it's caller driven, just like the Dave Ramsey Show. I'll have guests on from time to time, but primarily a caller-driven show. And so that's what we're doing on the Ken Coleman Show on Sirius XM, channel 132, every day, Monday through Friday at about 2 Eastern. We also podcast that show daily for those who don't have Sirius XM. And it's growing, and the thing that we're most excited about and proud of is that our callers are telling us every day that they have heard about our show from friends and have listened to the show and then trust me enough to call in to get advice. So that is something that, honestly, Jamy, is just truly a dream coming true on a daily basis.
Now, your show now is a lot of callers calling in, and you on the EntreLeadership, it was having guests, and you, like you mentioned, you still have some guests on the show now. Do you prepare differently? Do you have a different take on it when you're answering questions as opposed to asking the questions?
I don't think so, and I want to point out I still host the EntreLeadership program, so still doing that. That comes out every Monday. Still very involved with that as well. It's just different when I'm interviewing a guest. I'm thinking about, what does my audience want to know? What does my audience need to know? How can my guest best fulfill those two primary needs? So there's preparation there. I know what I want to get out of it. And then I allow myself, because of my preparation, I allow myself to be totally focused on listening to my guests, and I can ad lib and take the interview where it just naturally flows. When I'm hosting the Ken Coleman Show and callers are calling in and they're telling me what their challenge is, and then they're asking me what I think, that is a read and react situation. The only way I can prepare for that is to be constantly, every day, continuing learning and growing in the field that I'm in. So I'm constantly reading psychology studies, psychology books, so that I can truly grow and understand what's behind the call. So when the caller calls in, they're telling me this is my situation or these are my symptoms. But there's always something behind that. And when I can get to that and peel it back to that, then I'm able to give them the best advice on practical steps going forward. Sometimes a whole call is focused on just helping someone recalibrate their belief in themselves. So those are two uniquely different disciplines. And you have to be steeped in your theology and the Bible and what God says about work and how God uniquely created us. That's what informs my philosophy. And then my philosophy informs my methodology. So as long as I'm staying completely steeped in that and learning and growing in that three-pronged approach, theology, philosophy, methodology, then it's just about being a good listener. And half of the role of hosting the Ken Coleman Show is being a really good listener and being a sounding board where the sound of their problem and of their situation bounces off of me, and when it bounces off of me back to them, it is again soaked in sound theology, sound philosophy, sound methodology.
Now, we had executive business coach Lolly Daskell on the show, episode 44, and she said that a good coach is not someone that has all the answers, but someone that asks the right questions or good questions. And as a radio host, you're asking good questions, and you're known for the questions that you ask. But most of us aren't radio hosts, so why is it important for us in our daily lives to ask good questions, whether we're around friends or family, and how can we be better at asking questions?
Well, the primary answer to that is it's important that we continue to keep our antennas of curiosity alive. So the simple act of asking questions yields really good results. When we are walking around in a declarative state, so that's all we do is walk around and we state our opinion and we state this fact and we state this fact. What happens is over time, you lose the natural curiosity that we were all created with and born with. We know this. Any parent listening right now is already shaking their head when I say your kids don't have to be taught how to ask questions. They just ask questions. They're literally soaking up the world around them. Every day as they grow older, they want to know why this? What is this? Why do we do this? And so over time, that curiosity kind of just ebbs. and we need to keep it flowing. And the idea here is that we know from research from the University of Michigan that I cited in my book One Question that by the time the average American gets to the 8th grade, they're asking 2 to 3 questions a day. Now you juxtapose that with the toddler who's asking hundreds of questions in a day. What's going on there? Well, life. And then we've got this education system, Jamie, that is teaching our kids how to answer questions. So you become this assembly line test taker, and we're not teaching our kids how to ask questions. And so what happens is you get the curiosity essentially beaten out of you through the humdrum of every day. I'm reprogrammed to answer questions, and I find that the best way to answer a question is not study something for a test, but to go out and ask. And that's why it's important, whether you're a radio host or just an everyday, of course, I'm an everyday person too, so I hate that phrase. But no matter what you do, if you're in a constant state of curiosity, what's happening is you're constantly learning, which means you're constantly growing. And we've all heard the phrase, which is true, if you're not growing, you're dying. So the key to growth is learning. The key to learning is asking.
Has there been a question, you've had a lot of big-time guests, and has there been a question that you wanted to ask but decided not to ask, and you kind of kick yourself for it later or regret it not asking that question later on?
I don't think so, no. I really don't. Because of the type of questions I'm in. I'm not in the gotcha journalism business. So the stuff that I'm asking is so organic because of the preparation that I put into it, and the audiences that I have served is in the personal growth leadership space. So it's a completely different context. So if that is the case, I can't think of anything. Nothing pops to my mind. I've never finished an interview going, oh, there was this one thing I wish I could have asked.
On the flip side, has there been something you asked and maybe you got a completely surprised answer to, or you regretted asking it after you did ask the question?
Again, not a specific question that comes to mind, but I will tell you, in my early days of doing interviews, I'm positive there were questions that I asked that I may have prepared for and I didn't listen to the answer prior to, and there probably were many times, I can't think of specifics, but I know there were many times in my early days where I missed an opportunity for a good follow-up question and asked something that I had pre-prepared, and it probably wasn't the best question to ask at that time. And I think that's a big mistake that young interviewers, inexperienced interviewers make. They've pre-prepared, which is nice, but they're nervous or they're not at a point where they're confident enough in themselves to listen to their guest and not worry about the next question, and just know that when they're done talking, you can look at your question and then ask it, but they're thinking about the next question with about a minute and a half, 2 minutes to go in their guest answer. That's a critical mistake. So I think I know I made that mistake early on, and so that would be the answer to that question. But nothing that I was debating in the middle and then I asked it and I was like, oh, that was inappropriate or that was just bad. I don't recall anything like that.
Well, Stephen Covey says most people don't listen with the intent to learn. They listen with the intent to reply.
That's right.
So that would definitely play into what you just said. Great advice there. Do you have a bucket list? Do you have some people that you haven't interviewed that you would still love to interview?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I don't know that a bucket can contain it. It's probably a warehouse list, because when you do what I do, you know, the list is so huge. I kid you not. If I had to limit it to a bucket, I would say, you know, there are some people that are no longer with us that I would have loved. So I'd throw in the bucket of, oh, I wish, and that would have been, you know, people like Ronald Reagan, Robin Williams was such a brilliant thinker, and now we know that he struggled with depression. I would have loved to have interviewed him. There are current people like Oprah Winfrey that I love her story, and I love what she has done, and I'd love to interview her. I'd love to interview Bill Clinton. I'd love to know how he got out of bed after the whole scandal thing. Right or wrong, love him or not like him, hate his politics, like his politics. That's a fascinating interview. I'd love to interview Tiger Woods for the same reason. I love redemption. And I'd love to do different type of interviews that they've never done before, the type of questions that I would ask, and where I'd love to take them so that other people could say, hey, I identify with that. So many champions, so many captains of industry. I could go on, but I guess those are probably, that's at the top of the list. Those names I threw out would be right up there.
We'll get back to this great interview with Ken Coleman in just a moment. You know, his book, One Question, is one of the more entertaining and insightful books I've read in a long time. He interviews some big-time people and asks them just one question. He has Malcolm Gladwell. He has a question to Coach Pat Summitt, to Tony Robbins, to Senator John McCain, and to President Jimmy Carter. And you can get this book, rather, you can even listen to this book now, because our friends at Audible are offering you a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/success-is-a-choice to take advantage of this great offer. So go ahead, go there, audibletrial.com/success-is-a-choice, download Ken Coleman's One Question book and listen to it. You won't be disappointed. And now let's get back to this great interview with Ken Coleman. Well, you mentioned that you love redemption stories, and you also mentioned a number of former presidents there that you would have loved to interview, but you did interview Jimmy Carter.
Yes.
Kind of for your book, and you titled it under the reinvention section, and not that he had to totally redeem himself, but his presidency was not looked upon as one of the best presidencies ever, but he's now looked upon as one of the great statesmen of all time.
Yeah, that's why I had him in the book, One Question, to ask him about reinventing yourself, because I think that he's such a great example of, he reached the highest position you can reach in America, right? So if you just look at what's the pinnacle, Americans still see the presidency as that's the top, that's the biggest deal. And his presidency was not successful at the time. It's still not viewed as successful, yet, as you point out, he really is one of the most admired presidents, certainly alive, in modern era, because of what he has done since his presidency. So I found that to be really, really encouraging, because there are seasons of life where they're marked by failure or frustration or setback, and yet it doesn't define us. And I just think that he is a wonderful example of allowing your story, and even the seasons of your story that are not successful, to refine you, not define you. And he certainly models that.
Well, and for those that haven't picked up a copy yet, I highly encourage you, and we'll have it in the show notes, Ken's book, One Question, and you can certainly read it all the way through, or you can pick and choose based on the topics or based on the people that he interviewed. How did the idea for this book come about, and kind of what was that experience like?
I had been doing some consulting for a friend of mine who's a New York Times bestselling author, and in helping him with some things, he said, Ken, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, yeah, I have, but I think at the time I might have been 32, 33, somewhere in that range, 34. And I said, yeah, I have, but I don't have that singular idea right now, and I think I need more life experience. It's not something I'm actively thinking about. And he said, I want to challenge you on that. I think you've got some depth. I think you've got a great story so far, and I think you've got something to offer, and I want you to talk to my book agent. I said, okay, sure. So I talked to the book agent, and we just had a nice 30-minute conversation and talked about what was in my heart and things of that nature. And we didn't really get anything clear. And towards the end of the call, she said, well, if I was going to get you a book deal right now and you could write about anything right now, stop limiting yourself, but what would you write about right now? And I said, essentially what I said to you just a few minutes ago, I said, well, I'm fascinated by curiosity and questions, and I'm becoming a respected interviewer. By this point, I'd had some national platform through a national leadership conference, and was hosting a podcast called the Catalyst Podcast that was doing very, very well. And it was really just an interview show. And I was doing long form interviews and getting, really nice comments and some respect nationally and blah, 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 blah. So I kind of said that answer, and she went, that's really good. What kind of a book would you do, and how would you showcase the importance of curiosity? And just in the moment, I said, well, I think I would highlight the power of just one question in our lives. And I didn't have the idea for multiple guests at that point, but she went, I really like that. And so she said, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to send you an outline for a book proposal. I want you to just flesh out how would you best highlight the power of one question in our lives, a singular question. And so that I went back, did my homework, and came up with the idea of, at the time, I was blessed to have a huge Rolodex of very wise and well-known men and women, and I came up with the idea of, okay, I'm going to ask one question of all these people, and the one question is different for each one, and it is geared towards their expertise and their experience, and it is also, in every major area of life that I've experienced so far, and I want it to be something that will stand the test of time. Evergreen questions, evergreen answers, and that's how we came up with the idea, and it just really flowed. It got a book deal. Simon & Schuster jumped on it, and we did the whole thing in 4 months, because everybody that I called was like, really? You're only going to ask me one question? And most of these people I'd interviewed before, so they knew me. And when I sent them the question, they were like, yeah, let's do it. And so it's a fun little book. It's easy to read because every chapter is no more than 3 to 4 pages. I like to call it, each chapter is a Snickers bar for your head and your heart. You don't have to read it all at one sitting. They stand alone. We divide the book into 3 sections: succeeding, surviving, and sustaining. 3 seasons that we all walk through in life, and big life questions, anything from failure to, which I asked Dave Ramsey about, to courage, who I asked John McCain about, to reinvention, Jimmy Carter, and on and on and on the list goes. It's a fun book. Really, really proud of it.
Yeah, and I think there's 36.
Yes.
35 or 36, so you could almost do it as one a day if you want to do that as well.
Yeah.
Or like I've been doing, I just read it straight through while I was on the stationary bike, so I wouldn't be as bored on the stationary bike.
Yeah, it really is a quick read, isn't it? It flows very nicely.
It is, and it's great. A lot of people that the average Joe would have heard of. It's a great book. Highly recommend it. And so if someone were to come to you and ask you a question, what would be kind of a one question that you rarely get asked, or that might be insightful or entertaining?
That's a tough question. Very tough question, because I'm wrestling with the feelings of narcissism here. What would be one insightful question someone would ask me that not normally gets asked? I think it would be, I'm trying to think of the insight factor. What I enjoy most about the interview process, I think that'd probably be a pretty insightful question, and not a lot of people ask me about the process, because it's not just sitting down and talking to somebody. It really is a process of preparation prior to writing the interview, thinking about the audience. Those 2 constructs I gave you earlier, I think, are gold for somebody who's trying to learn how to be a good interviewer. What does my audience want to know? What do they need to know? There's a difference between the 2. The art form of connecting with your guest, who many times is not sitting in the room with you. Very easy to connect with somebody when you're 2 feet apart and you got body language bouncing off of each other, and you can look each other in the eyes. And then after you're connecting, then how to listen, how to let an interview evolve, knowing when to stop an interview, stay there for a while, or stop the interview and completely redirect it, knowing how to finish the interview. How do you leave the audience on an upward arc, so that as they're listening, they feel like, oh, I want more of this. They're not angry that it ended, but they're a little bit wistful, if you will, that it has ended, because you've left them on a high. I mean, this is an art form. So as you can tell, I'm a real nerd about the process of an interview. So I think that would probably be the question.
Well, process isn't bad. Nick Saban has process, talks about it all the time, and he wins.
Yes. Yeah.
And the old Hall of Fame basketball coach John Wooden, it was said that he would spend 2 to 3 hours planning a practice for the 2-hour practice. So
that's right.
That process is important. Absolutely. Speaking of, I brought up Nick Saban, I bring up John Wooden. I know that you're a huge sports fan and you like to interview sports figures as well. And they can teach us a lot of life lessons and leadership lessons. Being a sports junkie, do you have a bucket list or a sporting event or two that you would absolutely love to attend that you haven't gone to?
I would say the British Open, final round British Open at St. Andrews would be one. I've been fortunate to go to a Super Bowl. I've been to the Masters on a Sunday. I've been to the National Championship basketball game. I've been to several Final Fours. So I think the British Open, I would say I'd have to throw a Ryder Cup. I think to be there on the final day of the Ryder Cup is a bucket list for me, no question. The Patriot in me would love that. I think a seventh game of a World Series would be pretty cool. So I'd throw that one in there. Like I said, I've been to a Super Bowl. I would have to say the bucket list of all bucket lists for me would be Michigan playing in the national championship game in football and it being at the Rose Bowl. That'd probably be the moment where I go, okay, God, you've been very, very, very good to me. I can't ask for anything else. I've been fortunate to go to a lot of cool sporting events. I think that's my list.
Well, I would love to join you out there when Michigan plays in the Rose Bowl for the national championship game. That would
go blue. I'm believing for that.
I will admit it. I drank the Kool-Aid of Coach Harbaugh and what he's trying to do at Michigan. If you could do competitive sports, if you could be like a pro athlete or a competitive athlete, what would that be?
If I could be a professional athlete, it would be basketball is my favorite sport to play and favorite sport to consume. So yeah, I'd be the John Stockton type point guard. That would be, if I was an athlete and could make that happen, that would be it.
You're always giving. You're always asking questions. What are you doing to kind of grow yourself?
Well, reading is the primary answer. I'm reading. I'm in the Bible, which again, my theology is what informs my philosophy and methodology. I'm reading biographies. I read one biography a month. I think that one of the great things we can do, no matter what field you're in, but certainly my field, because I'm in the field of human behavior and human development, and I'm in the heart business. And it's really important that I am personally reading about men and women of note and of accomplishment because they didn't start that way. And it's important to just constantly be reminded of the journey, the process, the self-awareness. So biographies are huge to keep me in the space I need to be in. I read psychology articles, psychology studies. I read other best-selling books that are in my space that have come before me. And then I am making sure that I'm watching things that challenge me and things that lift me, inspire me. I read, again, same field. So for me, I'm watching documentaries about teams or people of triumph over hardship or success from nothing. So that's documentaries, movies, things of that nature, because it's really important that I keep my heart as engaged as I keep my brain. And because I'm listening to real people. I mean, today I'll talk to 6 or 8, however many call in today, and however many we can get to on my show. And my heart has got to be soft. It's got to be perceptive. It has to be empathetic. It has to be compassionate. So what I read and what I watch, it's got to be a nice mix of education and inspiration. And so I'm reading and I'm watching. And then I would say this, I'm blessed right now to have a daily show. If I didn't have a daily show, I'd still have some daily repetition so that I'm developing the skill set that I have to employ, which is listening and communicating practical advice. And so thankfully, I get to do what I love to do every day, but because I get to do it every day, I'm getting better every day. You cannot replace daily repetition. I don't care what you're doing, where you're doing it, or why you're doing it. Daily repetition. So again, doing. I want to be very clear. I believe in learning. I believe in observing. But doing on some level, even if it's a microscopic portion of what you want to do eventually, daily doing is the number one formula, number one act to grow you. I promise you, there's no replacement for daily doing.
Well, and you need to go do your radio show. I know you're crunched for time here, and you're on your way to the studio. So we do appreciate you giving us a few minutes today. Sirius XM, channel 132. You can catch the Ken Coleman Show daily. So Ken, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jamie. And I would just tell folks, if you don't have Sirius XM, just search the Ken Coleman Show on iTunes or Google Play, and you could subscribe. It's going to bring you a new show every day of the week, Monday through Friday. Thank you, Jamie. I really do appreciate you, what you're doing, and you asked some really, really good questions.
Thanks for listening to the show today. I absolutely love listening to the EntreLeadership Podcast hosted by Ken Coleman. He does a great job of asking questions, and he always has the best guests. You'll also want to check out his daily show on Sirius XM as well. You can find those links as well as a link to his book, One Question, in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and if you haven't yet done so, please take just a quick second, hit that little subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Thanks again, and remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?